must have been employed long before there was such a thing as literacy, that is, reading and writing. The second filter did not come in until science started, I think. And this is the numerate filter. You asked how much, how many, how big, how small. And as soon as you did that, many things that you thought you had firmly in mind turned out to be rather different from what you thought. Now this grew during about 2,000 years of the growth of science from the Greeks to the present time. And it was only beginning about a century ago that a third filter was added, finally in a very conscious way, and this is the one I call the ecolate filter, the filter of ecology, the filter that deals with the relations of one thing to another, of the relative sizes and the consequences of that, rates of change and the consequence of that, and the possibility of thresholds below which something won't happen. A whole bunch of things, but all dealing with relations of many variables. And this is, I think, characteristic of our time, and this is not fully appreciated. One of the things that happens to people who don't have the ecolate filter at all, don't use it at all, is that they make projections of present trends into the future, and then they're surprised when they don't happen. Well, this has now become so widely recognized that we have a phrase for this. We speak of the unexpected consequences of actions. In other words, you have the theory that's very good indeed, and it predicts all sorts of things, but some things it just fails completely. They turn out to be quite different. And when you look back, you discover you didn't notice certain relationships to things outside of your system. And so the ecolate filter says be sure that you find out the relations between things as well as their names and their sizes. Now, it does seem to me that many of the things that religion deals with really have to be criticized as being just on the verbal level, that they are literate level. They're words that are plausible, but beyond that you can't say very much. They're sort of an informal approximation to the facts, to the ecology of the situation, to the total situation where unintended consequences happen. And this, I think, is true of words like spirit and intuition, sanctity, and God. I just don't think one can give any exact meaning to any of these. A part of the scientific attitude, a very important part, is found in Descartes' Meditations, which set the spirit of science in an important way. He said at the beginning of the Meditations, which he wrote at age 46, he said, "Some years ago, I realized that it was necessary once in the course of my life to demolish everything completely. To demolish everything completely and start again, right from the foundations, if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last." In other words, he's saying one has to become as a child and look at it all over again. This is not easy to do. You have to take your doubts seriously and face each one of them, and don't at any point in desperation say, well, you just have to have faith in that. Faith is not, to a scientist, faith is a form of vice. He doesn't indulge in it, not consciously. A friend of mine in Texas a few years ago, about a decade ago, told me of wonderful bumper sticker that he was seeing all over his large city. The bumper sticker said, "God says it, I believe it, that settles it." Now that, I think, is as far as you can possibly get from the scientific attitude. But it makes many people very happy, and so maybe it should be tolerated or even encouraged. However, that isn't the scientific spirit. And an important element of the scientific spirit was contributed by a French philosopher, Montesquieu, in 1721, when he wrote the Persian Letters. He wanted to criticize many things in his world, and he realized that there was danger in criticizing them. They were not so far from the Inquisition and other forms of violence stimulated by religion that he was willing to take a chance. So he pretended, this is a story of letters, a Persian visiting France was supposed to have written home to his friends at home. And by pretending in that way, he could say all sorts of things that he otherwise couldn't have gotten away with. He commented, for example, he broke into it gradually. He pointed out the very humorous thing that in France, the men wear trousers. Can you imagine that? You see, in Persia, it was the women who wore trousers, and yet these funny men wear trousers. And also the men had wigs, and they cut off their hair and they put wigs on. And that was a very curious thing to do. Then he said there is a magician at the head of the French government who can make 2 million crowns do the work of 1 million, just by declaring a new value to the crown. So he's plainly a magician. And in Rome, there's another magician who can make 3 into 1. And that, of course, is the Trinity. And Montesquieu did not dare to ridicule the Trinity, but he could have his Persian visitor do so. At any rate, this was an important step in the development of a more critical view towards literacy, towards literate values. And it was continued by Adam Smith, who in 1759, this was before he became an economist, invented the idea of a disinterested spectator. He says, I divide myself, as it were, into 2 persons, and one of them is a disinterested spectator. And the word disinterested is meant in the economic sense, a person who has no economic or other interest, see, not intellectual interest, but material interest in the outcome. And you have to be a disinterested visitor, disinterested spectator. Very shortly thereafter, somebody invented the man from Mars, pretended, see, of course, this is just Montesquieu's Persian visitor, but from a more distant place, and even more objective, I think you can say, than a Persian would be. And the man from Mars continues to the present day and is still a useful intellectual tool to use when you're trying to make yourself into a disinterested observer. Say, well, now, what would the man from Mars say about this? See, in other words, shed all your taboos and conventional beliefs and try to answer, what would he say about this?
Thank you very much, Professor Hardin.
So that, I think, presents the basis of in which I would say that we have to analyze this in terms of the language pathology rather than in terms of fact.